All right, today I'm reading Curious George Gets a Medal. Curious George gets a medal. This is George. He lived with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. George was alone this morning, looking at a picture book, when the doorbell rang. It was a mailman. Here's a letter for you, George, he said. Put it on your friend's desk, and he'll read it to you when he gets home. George was curious. It was not often somebody wrote to him. Too bad he could not read the letter. But maybe he could write one himself. In the top drawer of the desk, there was paper, ink, and a pen. George sat down on the floor and began to write, but the pen was dry. It needed ink. George would have to fill it up. He got a funnel from the kitchen and started to pour. But instead of it going into the pen, it spilled all over and made a big blue puddle on the floor. It was an awful mess. Quickly, George got the bloater from the desk, and that was no help. The puddle grew bigger all the time. George had to think of something else. Why? Soap and water. That's what he used to clean up with. From the kitchen shelf, he got a big box of soap powder, poured it all over the ink. He pulled a garden hose through the window, opened the tap, and sprayed the water on the powder. Bubbles began to form, and lots of lather, and more lather, and more lather, and more lather. In no time, the whole room was full of lather, so full indeed that George had to escape in a hurry. When he was safely out the house, he turned off the tap. But what next? How could he get rid of all the lather before his friend came home? George sat down in the grass and thought for a long time. Finally, he had an idea. He would get a big shovel and shovel lather out the window. But there was no lather. While George had been outside thinking, it had all turned into water. Now the room looked like a lake, and the furniture like islands in it. The shovel was no use. A pump was what George needed. To get the water out, and he knew just where to find one. He had seen a portable pump at the farm down the road. The farmer was away, working in the field. Nobody noticed George when he got the pump out of the shed. It was heavy. He would need help to pull the pump all the way back to the house. Maybe he could tie the goat to the pump and make him pull it. But just as George was about to slip the loop over the goat's head, he hurtled through the air and landed near a pig pen. The biggest pig was standing near the gate. What if George opened the gate just enough to let him out? A big pig could easily pull a small pump. Carefully, George lifted the latch, and before he knew it, all the pigs had bursted out of the pen, grunting and squealing and trying to get away as fast as they could. George was delighted. He had never seen anything like it. For the moment, all his troubles went away forever. But now the pigs were all gone, and not a single one was left to help with the pump. Luckily, there were cows grazing nearby. Cows were gentle and strong. It would mean nothing to a cow to pull a pump for him. This time, George is right. The cow did not mind being tied to a pump, and she even let him climb on her back. And off they went. George was glad. Now he would soon be home, pump out the room, and everything be all right. Meanwhile, the farmer and his son heard the squealing of the pigs. They rushed home from the fields, and now they had the handful catching all the pigs, not until the last one was safely back in its pen. Did they have time to look around, and what did they see? A little monkey riding on their cow, making off with their pump. The chase was on. George and the cow were ahead at first, but the pump was slowing them down. Farmers were getting closer and closer. Now he had almost caught up with them. Where's George? He was hiding in his shirt. The farmers had ran past him, but they were on their way home. They had to come back over the same road. George did not feel safe in his hiding place. Just then, a truck rattling down the road. George jumped aboard. Monkeys are good at jumping. And was gone before the farmer had a chance to see him. The truck drove to a part of town that George had never seen before. At last, it stopped in front of a large building. It was a museum. George did not know what a museum was. He was curious. While the guard was busy reading the paper, George slipped inside. He walked up the steps and into the room full of sorts of animals. At first, George was scared, but then he noticed they did not move. They were not alive. They were stuffed animals put in the museum so everyone could get a closer look at them. In the next room, George saw something enormous. It took his breath away. It was a dinosaur. George was not scared this time. He knew it was not real. He looked at the dinosaur and then at the baby dinosaur. And then saw the palm tree full of nuts. George liked nuts. Suddenly, he felt very hungry. He had missed lunch this day. He would climb up, and just then, he heard footsteps. He had to hide again. But where? A family came to take a look at the dinosaurs. They paid no attention to the little monkey who was standing there. The monkey did not move. He stood so still, they thought he was just another stuffed animal. George was glad when they were gone. Now he could pick the nuts. He climbed the dinosaur's neck and started to pull, but the nuts would not come off. George did not know they were real. He pulled harder and harder. The tree began to sway. Crash. Down came the tree on the dinosaur's head. Down came the dinosaur, and down came George. Guards came rushing in from all sides. Underneath the fallen dinosaur, they found a little monkey. They pulled him out of there and brought him to Professor Wiseman, who was the director of the museum. Professor Wiseman was terribly angry. "Lock that naughty monkey up right now," he said, "and take him back to the zoo. He must have ran away from there." George was carried off in a cage. He felt so ashamed, he wished he was dead. Suddenly, the door opened. "George!" somebody shouted. It was his friend, the man with the yellow hat. "It seems you got yourself in a lot of trouble today," he said. "But maybe this letter will get you out of it. It's from Professor Wiseman. He needs your help for an experiment. I found it on my desk at home, but I could not find you anywhere. So I came over here to talk to the professor. "So you are George," Professor Wiseman said. "If I'd only known. Of course, everything will be forgiven if you are willing to go." They got the smallest size spacesuit for George and all of the other things he needed for flight. Then they helped him put them on and showed him how to use them. When everything was ready, a truck drove up with a special television screen mounted on it to watch the flight. Then they all got on and went off to the launching site. They checked all of the controls of the spaceship, especially a lever that opened the door. George tried it too. The great moment had come. George waved goodbye and went aboard. The door was closed. Professor Wiseman began to count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. He pressed the button to the ship. He pressed the button and the ship rose into the air slowly at first, and then faster and faster and higher until they could no longer see it in the sky, but on the screen. They saw George clearly all the time. Now the moment has come for George to bail out. Professor Wiseman flashed the signal. They watched the screen. George did not move. Why didn't he pull the lever? In a few seconds, it would be too late. The ship would be lost in outer space with George in it. They waited anxiously. At last, George began to move, slowly, as if in a daze. He was reaching for the lever. Would he reach it in time? There he had grabbed it. The door opened. Hooray! George was on his way. Out of the blue, an open parachute came floating down to Earth. The truck raced over to the spot where George would land. What a welcome for George. Professor Wiseman hung a big golden medal around his neck. Because, he said, you are the first living being to come back to Earth from a space flight. And on the medal, it said, to George, the first space monkey. Then a newspaper took his picture, and everyone and the kind woman from next door who had worked for hours to get the water out of the room. I'm proud of you, George, said the man with the yellow hat. I guess the whole world is proud of you today. It was the happiest day of George's life. The end.